There you go.
Hi, we're here with Fletcher McClellan. He's a political science professor at Elizabethtown College and dean of the faculty there. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about Governor Wolf's address. He just was in front of a joint session of the General Assembly at 11:30, and he put out a proposal and wanted to know what you thought of it. Going into it, a lot of people thought it would be bold and ambitious. Was that the case?
Okay, we're breaking up a little bit on my end, but you're wanting my initial reaction, I guess.
Yes.
Well, on the one hand, mostly he's pretty much presented in budget form what he promised he was going to do during the campaign, and in his inaugural address. And we had a number of trial balloons and leaks and kind of publicity run up to this. So what eventually came out, I think, was expected, not much of a surprise. He put education as his first priority. He talked about growing the middle class and improving the business climate. He talked about reforming government, making it more transparent, and some of those plans have already been put forth in terms of government reform, but he alluded to some others that we may see some further initiatives on. So, I think the core of the plan was the plan to basically increase funding for education by a number, and at the same time, dramatically, if this happens, reduce property taxes. Doing this in several ways, by imposing a severance tax, by increasing the income tax, sales tax, to make the tax system itself more broadly based, to help bring about more equitable school funding, to increase the state share of funding for public education to 50%. So I think all those things, if they happen, would amount to a tremendous or a very significant change.
As far as him being bold and ambitious, a lot of people say your first year is the year to do
Right.
something like this. Did he deliver on what you expected?
Yeah, I think chief executives everywhere, from the president on down, recognize that that the first year is sort of the year to get most of your agenda done. Now, and Governor Wolf, I think, is in a little bit, on the one hand, he's in a better position because he just defeated an incumbent governor by an impressive margin. He has a pretty favorable public image, one that he's kind of cultivated as a kind of a citizen, non-politician, businessman, problem solver, and he's even a little bit professorial, as he was in today's address, and so as long as he can maintain that approach, and I think that will be difficult because ultimately he's going to have to make bargains and deals, and also work with his party, and risk being kind of viewed as partisan and ideological. But nevertheless, if he can maintain that approach, I think he has set forth a bold agenda, and has a chance at least of getting some of it done. Now, some chief executives sort of look at this in the long run. They don't necessarily expect to get everything that they want at one time unless they have really large majorities of their party in the legislature. This governor does not. So, we can kind of look at things as sort of making gradual progress on a number of fronts over several years. I think his prospects for success will improve.
Did the way he handled himself, did that surprise you at all? What did you think we learned from his mannerisms, from his approach, his tone? Is there anything that can be learned from that?
Well, it's the same tone I think we saw during the campaign. Not too much in the way of rhetorical flourishes, pretty plain speaking, a lot of sort of ordinary citizen type remarks like, I don't get this doesn't make sense to me, just looking at it from the outside, no one would run their business this way, that sort of thing. And as I say, I think that's, when you're working with a legislature dominated by the other party, I think, that's that's a plausible approach to take. As I say, I think you run the risks because, if you play that sort of I'm just an ordinary person role a little bit too much, you may get rolled. People will take advantage of you. You may be viewed as naive. So at the same time, he has to show that he's going to be tough. He's going to use the powers of his office aggressively, and we think we've already gotten a few indications of that. That he's he's not going to roll over, and he's going to be persistent.
Were there any surprises, anything that we learned or that we didn't expect in this budget?
From the budget itself, increases in healthcare spending, the Medicaid expanding traditional Medicaid, and sort of taking out the Corbett Healthy Pennsylvania privatization approach, more money for DEP and for enforcement of oil and gas drilling sites. Those aren't surprises. Calling for an increase in the minimum wage. I think what he was trying to do, though, was to come across as bipartisan by taking some ideas that have been suggested by the Republican leadership, mainly, a significant reduction in the property tax, also reducing the corporate tax significantly, to try to improve the business climate, sort of taking those approaches and, frankly acknowledging that these are your ideas and they're good ones. And fusing that with more traditional approaches you might see from a Democrat governor in terms of improving or increasing funding for public education and the minimum wage. He didn't say much about things that Republicans would like to have heard more about. All he said about pension reform is that we're going to make it stronger. And what he said about privatizing the liquor system here is that we're going to modernize it. I think they'd like to have heard more. A couple of very tantalizing things he said on the government reform agenda. He said that he would look forward to working with the legislature on campaign finance reform and redistricting reform, which we haven't heard a whole lot about. He didn't say anything about it, and there seem to be some murmurs in the House chamber, sort of, gee, I'm wondering what he has up his sleeve there. So those are proposals yet to come, and if he's in order to focus on his agenda, he's probably not going to spend a lot of time talking about those sort of good government items, and hopefully not get involved in issues. He already has made he already declared a moratorium on capital punishment. I doubt, or I would be very surprised if he talks about guns or abortion or any sort of hot moral issue. I think he's going to have to stay focused on his education and economic reform agenda.
What out of this plan do you think he has any chance of getting accomplished? He faces a huge majority in both the Senate and House,
Right.
So he doesn't really have too many friends. But do you think there's anything that they can find a middle ground on, a compromise or a consensus?
Well, people have suggested that there's a grand bargain out there where he goes along with Republican proposals on pension reform and or liquor control in return for, along with the ideas he has for the property tax reduction and corporate tax reduction, in return for increasing spending on public education. Some people think there's this sort of grand bargain. I'm not quite sure whether things will sort of happen in this very broad, comprehensive manner. I mean, that might have happened, maybe, what seems decades ago, when party leaders in the legislature had a lot more control of their caucuses. But I think both Republican leaders in both the House and Senate are going to have problems with their own caucuses, especially the House with a rather conservative rank and file, and with the two chambers trying to reconcile different versions. It's going to be very difficult, just to sit down at a bargaining table and work out this sort of grand compromise. So, I think at best we would be looking at sort of piecemeal reform. As I say, I think the main thing for him is increasing education funding and the state share of education funding, linking that to reductions in increases in some taxes, the income tax and state sales tax, in return for reductions on property tax and corporate taxes. I think that's the best that could happen. And even then, probably a better chance of reducing the corporate tax. Governors, especially Democrat governors, have waded into this property tax reform, and the problem there is that for every 10 people, there are 10 different ideas about how to do it. Maybe you can find some common ground there. People generally dislike the property tax and want something done about it. So given that there is some agreement about that, if that can be linked to increased public education funding, then that might be the best that we'll be able to see this year.
So we had kind of joked before this began that this is kind of the end of the beginning, and there's going to be a long budget season ahead of us. Is it going to get done by the June 30th deadline?
I would say not. Governor Rendell was kind of famous with delivering and getting agreement on budgets with a mainly Republican legislature. I think we're in for a long haul on this. So I wouldn't expect anything anytime soon.
When you talked about property taxes, and that's a huge issue here in Lancaster County, a lot of people talk about it. When you do shift the tax burden,
right?
When you raise the sales tax and the personal income tax, who are the losers of that situation? Who are the winners?
Well, I think generally speaking, you're trying to broaden the tax base. So, probably higher income people are going to view this as losers. On the other hand, the sales tax tends to work against lower income people because you're taxing basic goods that they can only have so much money to afford. Mm-hmm. So it's an attempt really to sort of appease both sides by increasing the burden on both high income and low income groups. At the same time, those that have property, and especially those who are on fixed incomes, they should benefit a lot from this. Okay.
Is there anything that stood out to you that you think was especially bold or ambitious that you think it's going to be something to watch going forward?
Well, I think to me it's going to be how he pursues this agenda. I think he's come across as a non-political figure, and doing that while at the same time getting agreement with the legislature is going to be difficult, controlled by the other party. There are some things that he's done, and you yourself have chronicled this, that are very similar to other Democratic governors. They all want to increase spending for education. They all want to broaden the tax base. They're reluctant to cut into the workforce of state workers and the liquor store, state store employees, and there'll be a lot of opportunity for Republicans to say, well, he's just another, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's
mm-hmm. Tax and spend liberal. Yeah.
Tax and spend liberal, mm-hmm. And so how he manages that, how he's going to manage that while at the same time, holding on to that sort of unifier, bipartisan image is going to be very interesting going forward.
And something that he might have going for him that Rendell and Bob Casey, who are the past two immediate Democrats who were governors, is that they had careers in politics, whereas this is his first political experience in the spotlight like this.
Yes, and you know, as I say, the other, you know, danger is that you can, you know, appear to be, too naive. Now, he's not, I think, as inexperienced as he pretends to be. He did serve in Governor Rendell's administration, and I'm kind of proud to say that he has a PhD in political science. Hopefully, that has taught him something. So he at least knows about the political process. I think he'll learn it's a lot more involved and rough and tumble than what you know, even he has read and written about as a political scientist. Um, but you know, as I say, it's managing these competing images, these competing facets of his job. I think will be fascinating.
Well, we'll be watching, I'm sure, and it'll be probably a long experience, long budget season.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Fletcher, for joining us, and have a great day.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. You too.